Class, this is quiz number 7, which was unit circle degrees, but converted to radians. So you're getting ready for quiz 8. Quiz 8 is basically quiz 7, but there are no degrees. Everything is in radians. So you've got a link to this quiz. It's the quiz you already taken, but we've converted everything to radians. So this is what will be different. You will still need to fill in the unit circle. So you'll give the values of all of these. Square root of 3 over 2, 1/2. Square root of 2 over 2, square root of 2 over 2, and then 1/2, square root of 3 over 2, 0, 1, negative 1, 0, 0, negative 1. And then quadrant 1, everything is positive. Quadrant 2, only the sine is positive. Quadrant 3, only the tangent is positive. Quadrant 4, only the cosine is positive. And then the other thing you'll need to know is the values in radians. This is 0 radians. And remember, when you look at 30, 45, 60, 3, 4, 6, this is pi over 3, pi over 4, pi over 6. This is pi over here where we used to call 180. Halfway between there at 90 degrees, that would be pi over 2. Halfway between pi and 2 pi would be 3/2 pi. You don't have to write it, but when you make one full revolution, that brings you back to 2 pi. Okay, so that's just the same unit circle. Everything with the degrees has been converted to radians. So these are all the same problems you just did. They're converted to radians. So tangent negative 3/2 pi. We're going to need to find the angle negative 3/2 pi. Here's 0. If I go in a negative direction, this is negative pi. You can think of it as negative 2 over 2 pi. And so if I'm going in this direction, I have to go pi over 2 further than that to get to negative 3/2 pi. So negative 3/2 pi is this angle right here. So that is negative 3/2 pi. On the unit circle, that puts me at the same spot as pi over 2. What's the tangent at pi over 2? The tangent at pi over 2 is y over x. So this is 1 over 0, which you know to be undefined. Cosine of 5 pi over 6, or 5/6 pi. All you need to do is draw the angle. This is 0. This is pi. We're going to call it 6 over 6 pi. That means that 5 over 6 pi is this angle right here. So that's 5 over 6 pi. And then that means that the central angle that you see right here is pi over 6. So what's the cosine of pi over 6 in quadrant 2? Well, cosine is the x value. At pi over 6, the x value is square root of 3 over 2. In the second quadrant, cosine is a negative number. So negative square root of 3 over 2. Tangent of 3/4 pi. Find the angle 3/4 pi. Here's 0. Here's pi. Let's call it 4 over 4 pi. That means that 3/4 pi happens to be in the second quadrant. So that's 3/4 pi. The central angle, what's between 3/4 and 4/4? That's just going to be pi over 4. So what's the tangent of pi over 4 in the second quadrant? Tangent of pi over 4 is y over x. Go to the unit circle, pi over 4. Y over x, that's square root of 2 over 2 divided by square root of 2 over 2. So that's going to be 1. You're in the second quadrant. Tangent is negative. So this is negative 1. Cosecant of pi over 3. So let's find the angle pi over 3. That one is on your unit circle. Pi over 3. Okay, so if the sine is y, cosecant is 1 over y. So go to pi over 3. What is your y value? Your y value is square root of 3 over 2. So this is 1 over square root of 3 over 2, which is just 2 divided by the square root of 3. Cosecant of 7/6 pi. Do the same thing. This is 0. This is pi. Let's call it 6 over 6 pi. Well, that means that 7 over 6 pi has to be right here in the third quadrant. So that's 7 over 6 pi. And that means that the central angle is pi over 6. So I need to figure out the cosecant of pi over 6 in quadrant 3. Okay. The sine is the y, the cosecant is 1 over y. So what is 1 over y for pi over 6? Pi over 6, the y value is 1/2. So this is just 1 over 1/2. I'm in quadrant 3. If I'm in quadrant 3, the sign is negative. So this is just -2. Tangent of 4 pi. So if this is 0, this is pi. This is 2 pi. This is 3 pi. This is 4 pi. So that means that I made 2 revolutions, okay? So it's basically the same thing on your unit circle as 0. So if you look at 0, tangent is y over x. So y over x equals 0 over 1. Some people say this is undefined. Don't believe them. And here I am writing that down. It is not undefined. It is 0, okay? Don't write undefined on that. There were several that made that mistake on the previous quiz. Sine of 7/4 pi. Here's 0. Here's pi. Since it's in fourths, let's call this 4 over 4, okay? Well, I'm looking for 7/4. That's not really close to 4/4. When I get back around to a full revolution of 2 pi, that is 8/4 pi. Okay? So this means 7/4 is the angle that goes almost to 8/4. Okay? So this is the angle of 7/4 pi. The central angle, what's the difference between 7/4 and 8/4 is right here, pi over 4. So this is pi over 4 in the fourth quadrant. What's the definition of sine? It's the y value. Go to pi over 4 on your unit circle. The y value is square root of 2 over 2. You're in the fourth quadrant. The sign will be negative. Cosine of -2/3 pi. This is a negative angle, so I'm going to be measuring clockwise. So -2/3. Here's 0. Here is negative pi. Well, I'm going to write this as -3 over 3 pi. So that means that -2/3 pi, I will get to that angle before I get to -3 over 3. So that's -2/3 pi. That means the reference angle is pi over 3. So I've got pi over 3, and I'm in the third quadrant. What's the definition of cosine? Cosine is the x value. Go to pi over 3. What's your x value? That is 1/2. When you're in the third quadrant, the cosine is a negative number. Secant of pi over 2. So secant is the reciprocal of cosine. If the cosine is x, then the secant has to be 1 over x. So if you go to pi over 2, that's 90 degrees on your unit circle. What is 1 over x? 1 over x is just 1 over 0. And that is undefined. Okay. So the secant of pi over 2 is undefined. Sine of 9/2 pi. So this is 0, and this is pi. Okay. So if I think about this, where is 9/2? Okay. Several ways of doing this. So if you look at pi over 2, every time you go one quadrant, that's pi over 2. Okay, so when I get to pi over 2 and then pi, that's 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, 4 pi over 2, 5 pi over 2, 6 pi over 2, 7 pi over 2, 8 pi over 2, 9 pi over 2 is right here. Okay, so you can do it that way. Another way of looking at it is 9/2 is what, 4 1/2? Okay, so what is 4 1/2 pi? So that's every 2 pi is a revolution. So that's 2 pi, 2 pi, and 1/2 pi. So that's 2 revolutions and then a further 1/2 pi. So anyway, basically that angle is 2 revolutions and ends up here. So pi over 2 in your unit circle, sine is the y value. This is going to be 1. Okay. So a few more. Tangent of 9/4 pi. So this is 0. This is 4 over 4 pi. If I make a full revolution at 2 pi, that's 8 over 4 pi. So 9/4 pi is going to be just further than that. So that is the angle you see right here. That's 9/4 pi. That means this central angle here is pi over 4 because the difference between 8/4 pi and 9/4 pi is pi over 4. So tangent y over x. Go to your unit circle, pi over 4. Y over x is square root of 2 over 2 divided by square root of 2 over 2. And that is 1. Cotangent of minus pi over 4. So to draw the angle minus pi over 4, that's this angle that you see right here. Okay, so the central angle is just pi over 4 in the fourth quadrant. Okay, cotangent is x over y. So at negative pi over 4, x over y, so when you look at pi over 4, x over y, that's square root of 2 over square root of 2, that is 1. You're in the fourth quadrant. Tangent and cotangent are negative. Cosecant of 5/3 pi. This is 0. This is 3 over 3 pi. Back over here is 6 over 3 pi. That's one revolution. So it looks like 5/3 pi is almost to 6/3 pi. So if this is 5/3 pi, it means the difference between 5/3 and 6/3 is pi over 3. So that is my central angle, pi over 3 in quadrant 4. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. If the sine is y, the cosecant is 1 over y. So at pi over 3, what is your y coordinate? It's square root of 3 over 2. So this is 1 over square root of 3 over 2. I'm in the fourth quadrant. Sine will be negative. So this is just negative 2 over the square root of 3. Cosine of 0 pi. That's just a cosine of 0. Look at 0 in your unit circle. What's your x coordinate? It is 1. Cosine of 7/6 pi. Again, draw the angle. This is 0. This is 6 over 6 pi. That means that 7 over 6 pi is the angle you see here. And the central angle, what's the difference between 6 over 6 and 7 over 6? That's just pi over 6. So this is pi over 6 in quadrant 3. Cosine is your x value. What's the x value at pi over 6? It's square root of 3 over 2. You're in the third quadrant. The cosine is negative. Okay? That's it for the first kind of problem. The second kind of problem is you are solving for the angle. So find an angle between 0 and 2 pi that satisfies these conditions. Sine equal negative 1/2. So where on the unit circle do I see a y value of 1/2? That happens at pi over 6. Okay, so this is talking about the angle pi over 6, but it's negative. Where is the sign negative? The sign is negative in quadrants 3 and quadrants 4. Okay, so I got to figure out what these angles are. So in quadrant 3, if this is pi over 6, what is that full angle? Okay, so remember, this is 0, and this is 6 over 6 pi. Okay, what would happen if I go pi over 6 further? That's 7/6 pi. So that's one answer, 7/6 pi. If I need to find pi over 6 in the fourth quadrant, so that means find this angle. So the angle that starts from 0 and ends here. Okay, again, this is 0. This is 6 over 6 pi, and this is 12 over 6 pi, or 2 pi. So if I'm pi over 6 short of making a full revolution, what's 12 over 6 minus 1 over 6? That is 11 over 6 pi. Cotangent is negative 1. Definition of cotangent is x over y. Where do I see x over y being equal to 1? On the unit circle, that happens at pi over 4. So pi over 4, it's negative. Where is the cotangent or tangent negative? That happens in quadrant 2 and quadrant 4. So what does pi over 4, what does that reference angle look like in quadrants 2 and quadrant 4? In quadrant 2, if this is pi over 4, then I need to figure out what is this angle you see here. Well, if this is 0 and this is 4 over 4 pi, then this angle has to be 3/4 pi. So one of my answers is 3/4 pi. To find pi over 4 in the fourth quadrant, pi over 4. What is the angle that starts with 0 and ends right there? Well, this is 0. This is 4 over 4 pi. And when I make a full revolution, that's 2 pi, or 8/4 pi. So what's 8/4 minus 1/4? That is 7/4. So the answer is 3/4 pi and 7/4 pi. Secant equal -2 over the square root of 3. Okay. Well, if the secant is -2 over the square root of 3, that means that the cosine is the reciprocal of that. So the cosine is negative square root of 3 over 2. Where on the unit circle is cosine square root of 3 over 2? Cosine's the x value. This is talking about pi over 6. But it's negative. Where is the cosine negative? That happens in quadrants 2 and quadrants 3. So what does pi over 6 look like in quadrant 2 and quadrant 3? So I'll just draw this out. Pi over 6. I need to find the angle that measures from 0 over to that terminal side. This is 0. This is 6 over 6 pi. That means this angle has to be 5 over 6 pi. So 5 over 6 pi. And then in the third quadrant, what does this angle look like? So for the third quadrant, if this is pi over 6 in quadrant 3, what is the angle that measures from 0 over to here? That's 0, 6 over 6 pi. So it looks like it goes further than 6 over 6. What is 6 over 6 plus 1 over 6? That is 7/6. So 7/6 pi is the answer there. Cotangent is negative square root of 3. Okay? So cotangent is negative square root of 3. That means that x over y is going to be negative square root of 3. So where can I have x over y and get a square root of 3? Well, that happens at pi over 6. So at pi over 6, your x coordinate is square root of 3 over 2. Excuse me, I wrote that wrong. At pi over 6, your square root of 3 over 2 is your x coordinate. 1/2 is your y coordinate. This is square root of 3 over 2 times 2 over 1. This is square root of 3. So this is what happens. This is talking about pi over 6 on the unit circle. That's your x over y. So this is talking about pi over 6. It's a negative value. Tangent and cotangent, where are they negative? That happens in quadrants 2 and quadrant 4. So what does pi over 6 look like in quadrant 2, quadrant 4? So again, draw this out. Pi over 6 in quadrant 2. Pi over 6 in quadrant 4. And my goal now is to find what is the angle that measures from 0 to that terminal side. So again, I'll do the same thing. 0. 6 over 6 pi. And I can tell in quadrant 2 that is 5 over 6 pi. And in quadrant 4, so this is 0. If this is 6 over 6 pi, this is 12 over 6 pi, or 2 pi. So this angle is 11/6 pi. And the final, 1, 2, or 3 problems. So this is there are only 3 kinds of problems we had on this test. This is the third type where you got to put both of those together. So I got to figure out the tangent of 3/4 pi. So what does that angle look like? If this is 0 and this is 4 over 4 pi, well, that tells me that 3/4 pi is this angle right here. So if this is 3/4 pi, then the central angle is just pi over 4 in quadrant 2. Okay, so what's the tangent? Pi over 4, tangent, y over x. That's going to be 1. In quadrant 2, it's negative 1. So now I know that the tangent of 3/4 pi equal negative 1. So this problem now turns into sine of theta equal negative 1. So this just becomes the question, where is y equal to negative 1? So look on the unit circle. Where is your y value? Negative 1. That happens at, the last quiz you would have said 270, but here this happens at 3/2 pi is where I get that. Cotangent of pi over 2 equal the sine of theta. Okay, figure out the cotangent of pi over 2. Cotangent, that is x over y. At pi over 2, what is your x coordinate? It is 0. What is your y coordinate? That is 1. Don't write undefined. 0 over 1 is 0. So this problem, so that tells me that the cotangent of pi over 2 is 0. So this problem now becomes sine of theta equals 0. And this just becomes, can you answer the question, where is y equal to 0? Look on your unit circle. Y is equal to 0. That happens 2 places. That happens at 0 and pi. Okay. You could also write 2 pi, and you would also be correct on that. But just, if you look at it, 0 and 2 pi, these are basically the same terminal side. Those are identical. So I would take either of those as an answer probably here. And the last one here. Cosine of 11/6 pi equals sine of theta. Okay, let's figure out where that angle is. This is 0. This is 6 over 6 pi. When I get back around to 2 pi, remember 2 pi is the same thing as 12 over 6 pi. So where is 11/6? Well, 11/6 would be the angle that starts here and doesn't quite make it back around. Okay, so this is 11/6 pi. The difference between 11/6 and 12/6, that makes this central angle pi over 6. So this is talking about pi over 6 in quadrant 4. Okay, so the cosine of 11/6 pi is going to be the pi over 6 cosine in quadrant 4. So pi over 6, what's your x coordinate at pi over 6? That's square root of 3 over 2. You're in the 4th quadrant. Cosine is positive. So this problem now turns into sine of theta equals square root of 3 over 2. So this turns into the question, where is y equal to square root of 3 over 2? Look on your unit circle. Your y is equal to square root of 3 over 2 at pi over 3. So this answer is pi over 3, and it's positive. Where is the sign positive? Sign is positive in Q1 and Q2. Okay, so pi over 3 in quadrant 1. So what is this angle from here to here? It's just pi over 3. So pi over 3 is one of your answers. In quadrant 2, if this is pi over 3, then you know that this is 0. This is 3 over 3 pi. So that means the angle from here to here has to be 2 over 3 pi. And that is it. Okay? That should be it, guys. That is quiz number 7, reworked completely in Radians. So this is what quiz 8 is going to look like. Okay? You should be able to do all of these. It just takes comfort in finding those angles, switching your brain from working with degrees to working with radians.